Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who are joining us from the various time zones. Welcome to the joint seminar by the Embassy of Chile, the Embassy of Costa Rica, and the Ministry of Trade and Singapore Academy. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of distinguished ambassadors and High Commissioners. Welcome to MTI. We are privileged to have High Commissioner Cara Owen. We recognize UK's leadership in hosting the successful COP26 in Glasgow. We are also honored that Ambassador Mahmoud Assem El-Mekrabi of Egypt is here to deliver the opening remarks for the seminar. Egypt is the presidency of the COP27, which takes place in Sharm El-Sheikh in November this year. You can count on our support towards the success of COP27. I should also acknowledge the presence of High Commissioner Joe Tyndall, who played a very important role in the Paris Agreement, which sets the foundation for everything that we are doing today. The topic today, Glasgow Climate Pact, working towards Sharm El-Sheikh COP27, is highly topical. Climate change is a global issue with multidimensional implications. It concerns all of us. We see this played out on the ground, more frequent extreme weather affecting communities around the world, prolonged droughts, and more intense rainfall and flooding. No one country or group of countries can address this profound challenge. This needs concerted action from all countries. Let me highlight two aspects from the Glasgow Climate Pact. First, Glasgow Climate Pact highlights that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions. Second, which is important for all of us, the Glasgow Climate Pact emphasizes the role of multilateralism, the respect for the UNFCCC's rules-based system, and international cooperation in addressing climate change and its impacts in the context of sustainable development. In this spirit, this seminar will focus on how Chile, Costa Rica, and Singapore, long-standing proponents committed to the open rules-based international system, have played our part and continue to contribute to the objectives of the UNFCCC. This includes strengthening international cooperation in carbon markets and developing and deploying new technologies such as hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. This seminar features speakers from the three countries who will share their perspectives on COP26 outcomes and aims for COP27 in Sharm El-Sheikh. Can I now invite Ambassador Concha, followed by Ambassador Rojas, to make your opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. My dear friends, Ambassador of Costa Rica, United Kingdom, and Egypt. Peter, of course, he's like our mentor in this matter. Good morning in Singapore, and good evening in Latin America. The fight against climate change is a race against time. For the good of the planet, for those of us who inhabit it today, and for those who will call it home in the future, there is no time to lose in our efforts to tackle the global warming. I also take this opportunity to call on the concerned parties to stop Ukraine occupation as war destroy nature, accelerate global warming, and kill wildlife. Today, the embassies of Chile and Costa Rica in Singapore, along with Singapore Ministry of Trade and Industry, jointly organize a seminar to analyze the outcomes of COP26 Glasgow, as well as their commitment and goal for COP27, which will take place in Egypt this year, November this year. In terms of our engagement with climate change and the start of last United Nations Climate Conference, or COP26, my country officially handed over to the UK the presidency of this multilateral body, a position it held for 2 years. Retrospectively, in Glasgow, agreements of the utmost importance for humankind were dealt, such as the commitment of 141 countries to stop deforestation by 2030, 46 countries to eliminate the use of coal by 2040, and 103 countries to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. In that occasion, Glasgow, COP26, Chile delivered its long-term climate strategy. This strategy is Chile's roadmap to achieve net zero by 2050. Of these goals, the goal we set on that roadmap, most relevant are the setting of a national maximum of emissions, the decommissioning or conversion of coal-fired plants, and that the energy matrix will be 100% zero emissions by 2050. It is also important to say that a few days ago, the Green Hydrogen Industry Committee held its very first session with the presence of the President, Mr. Boric. This committee reflects the government commitment to promote not only decarbonization, but also to face climate change and promote a new model of sustainable development. The committee's main goal is to support the implementation of the National Green Hydrogen Strategy and the development of actions plan, manage and promote initiatives for the development of green hydrogen in my country. Now we are facing the COP27 standards we might establish at COP27. Sorry for that. We have here a panel of 4 experts representing Chile, Costa Rica, and Singapore, and they will deliver our national position and their thinking on the COP27 meeting in Egypt late this year. Thank you very much, and we'll see you around. Thank you.
Can I invite Ambassador Wills?
So serious. For first, I'm going to start speaking in Spanish. Maybe more of you can understand. Buenas tardes, buenos días para todos. Sounds fantastic, no? Good morning. Thank you, Ignacio, Peter, Mahmoud, and Cara, for creating this valuable opportunity to exchange experiences in our fight against the global warming. Thank you, Carlos Manuel and Ana, for sharing your time with us. They are one in Washington and the other is in Costa Rica. Being a country with a limited territorial extension has never been an obstacle to proposing great transformations. It's the case in my country. Costa Rica was the first country in the world to propose carbon neutrality in 2007. We wanted to achieve it by 2021, but the reality has been different. But we will continue in the fight. In 1997, we created environmental services by law and established a tax on fossil fuels that is used to protect the forest. We also managed to record the country forest cover. In 1970, it was just the 20% of our territory. Today, it's 53.4%. So we are one of the few developing countries that have achieved it. It's not enough to say we are going to do things. We have to do them in a sustainable way. That commitment was the same as that the Costa Rican Cristiana Figueres to manage the global agreement to combat the climate change COP25. Cristiana went to Saudi Arabia with a strategy of understanding rather than negotiation. She asked about the long-term goals that this country had, how they plan to diversify their economy, and she added countries that are willing to support the Saudis in meeting these goals. This was key to achieving the Paris Agreement. Today, we are here to together find ways to fight the global warming effectively. And thank you to join us in this dream. Los invito a soñar conmigo. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Rojas. Can I now invite High Commissioner Cara Owen to make some comments?
Many thanks, Peter, and to Ambassador Concha, Ambassador Rojas, Ambassador El-Maghrawi. Thank you so much for including me and allowing me to say just a couple of words about the UK's ongoing presidency of COP26 and our preparation for supporting a really successful Egyptian presidency of COP. Ambassador Concha, you kindly set out some of the achievements at Glasgow, which were really hard fought and took an awful lot of political will by a large number of countries. So we see the remaining months of our presidency in the UK as needing to accelerate and embed the progress that was agreed at Glasgow as much as possible. And I just want to focus on three things that we're continuing to do to support that. Number one is doing as much as we can to support countries to make sure that their delivery plans match the ambition that they stated at COP26. Secondly, really making sure that the financing that was promised at COP really comes on stream to enable countries to affect their transitions. And thirdly, to look at adaptation. It's really brilliant that you're going to be hearing today from countries that have shown the way and are able to share their experience on how they have taken forward their own climate ambitions. At Glasgow, of course, by the time we finished at Glasgow, 90% of global GDP and 75% of ASEAN's GDP was covered by net zero commitments. So really making sure that the delivery plans that all countries have are going to be able to deliver on those ambitions is a really strong priority for us. As yet, the NDCs that countries have got, not all of them actually support reaching the targets they have set themselves. So I think as a global community, it's in our interest to work really closely together to enable that to be reached. I think the September UN checkpoint is going to be very important in this regard, and supporting each of us, showing peer support to enable countries by the time they get to COP27 to set out really ambitious plans is really an important part of our activity. So keeping up pace is one of the things that we're really committed to do. Secondly, is really making sure that the commitment on unleashing both public financing, development financing, but also crowding in massive amounts of private financing to support transitions really becomes a reality. You can see since Glasgow, a number of countries have shown really strong movement in that regard. I think New Zealand has made a massive commitment. Australia and Japan have been talking about how they're going to increase their commitments as well, with really strong political signalling. But we really need to make sure that all of those commitments actually get to the countries that need them. And so we are continuing to look at how can you make sure that climate financing reaches the countries they need without too many burdens on those countries, so that we can get cracking on adaptation as soon and transition as soon as possible. And then the third area that we're looking at is adaptation. And we're very keen to make sure that the Santiago network gets up and running, which is kind of technical assistance to make sure that countries have the right adaptation plans in place. And also continuing with the lessons of the Glasgow dialogue, where we are identifying gaps either in technical capability or in financing to enable countries to affect their adaptation plans. Climate change is going to be the top international priority for the UK for years to come. And it's really wonderful to be part of a global coalition of countries that are committed to making progress so that we can keep the dream of 1.5 degree temperature rise within reach. Thank you ever so much for including me in this, and I wish everybody a successful seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Owen. Again, we appreciate the UK's leadership of COP26 and continue to provide the guidance as we prepare for COP27. It's my pleasure now to invite Ambassador Al-Maghrabi, even as Egypt guides us towards COP27. Ambassador?
Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues and friends, honorable speakers from Singapore, Chile and Costa Rica, here present in person or virtually attending. It's a pleasure for me to share with you some insights of COP27 presidency. The hosting of COP27 in Sharm El-Sheikh this year marks the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In the 30 years since, the world has come a long way in the fight against climate change and its negative impacts on our planet. We are now able to better understand the science behind climate change, better assess its impacts, and better develop tools to address its causes and consequences. With this in mind, the incoming Egyptian COP27 presidency has identified a range of topics focused on enhancing implementation and raising ambition on a broad range of issues related to climate change. Egypt has further designated several thematic days for focused discussions, including through side events, panel discussions, round tables, and other interactive formats to deliberate on and share with the wider audience. In Glasgow, parties reaffirmed the long-term global goal under the Convention and the temperature limitation goal of the Paris Agreement, and recognized that urgent action needs to be taken to keep the 1.5 degree target within reach. The Glasgow outcomes also highlighted the centrality of urgently scaling up support, including appropriate finance, capacity building, and technology transfer to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change in line with the best available science, considering the priorities and needs of developing country parties. As agreed by all stakeholders and confirmed in Glasgow COP26, this is a critical decade. Scaled up action on the ground, full implementation of commitments and pledges, new and additional provisions and mobilization of finance are all needed to achieve the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. Egyptian presidency structured COP27 action agenda with a focus on implementation, aiming at mobilizing collective efforts for ambitious emission reductions from different sectors, enhanced transformative adaptation agenda on the ground, enabling flows of appropriate finance, and delivering on the ground on time and at scale. In structuring the discussions within the different thematic days, the role of youth, civil society, and different stakeholders shall be taken into consideration to ensure their full and effective engagement. Furthermore, in structuring the days, dedicated sessions shall be allocated for Africa, aiming at furthering the understanding around solutions, challenges, and opportunities for the continent. Similarly, the role of regional cooperation, local governments, and cities will be elaborated as cross-cutting issues. Other initiatives and topics of interest such as, but not limited to, transport and waste will be included within the relevant days. The designated president of COP27's Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, during the last period, has met members of the different geographical and political groupings and also with chief negotiators of these groups. He reviewed the priorities of the upcoming Egyptian presidency of COP27, foremost among them the implementation of the climate pledges and the emergence of a balanced outcome that addresses priority issues, especially emission reduction, adaptation to climate change, addressing loss and damage, and providing climate finance. He has also explained the desire of the upcoming Egyptian presidency of the conference to to distance climate negotiations from the recent geopolitical developments on the international scene, and ensures the proper conduct of the negotiating process to produce expected results. Implementation requires inputs and contributions from all stakeholders, governmental and non-governmental alike. To conclude, allow me to emphasize the following key messages. It is time for implementation together through just and ambitious collective action, leaving no one behind. It is also time for inclusive, rules-based and ambitious substantive outcomes up to the scale of the challenge and reflective of the political will. Egypt is committed to support an inclusive, transparent and party-driven process to ensure the necessary urgency and momentum. It assumes the incoming presidency of COP27 with a clear realization of the importance of global efforts on climate change and with appreciation of the value of multilateral, collective, and concerted action as the only means to address this truly global threat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. On behalf of everyone, we'd like to express our appreciation for Egypt's leadership and also for highlighting to us the preparations that Egypt is setting in place for the COP later this year. So the ambassadors have spoken and they have actually set the context for this seminar. So now we'll move to the second part of our event today, is the sharing by our experts on this area. So we'll have the following speakers. I will introduce them in the order that they will be speaking. First, we'll have Mr. Julio Cordano from Chile. He's head of Environment, Climate Change and Oceans Divisions from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Followed by, we'll hear the sharing by Ms. Patricia Villalobos from Costa Rica, Chief of Staff, Office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship and Chief Negotiator for Climate Change for Costa Rica. Thereafter, we'll have our Mr. Joseph Teo, the Chief Negotiator for Singapore to the UNFCCC, followed by Ms. Jenny Mager from Chile, Head of Climate Change Division, Ministry of Environment. And thereafter, Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez from Costa Rica, CEO of the Global Environment Facility. And last, and also importantly, Mr. Benedict Chia, Director of National Climate Change Secretariat of Singapore, who is our lead for carbon markets issues. So with that, let me now invite Mr. Julio Cordano, who will be speaking to us virtually, to take the floor. Julio, you have the floor.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak for the seminar. And thank you very much to all the presenters and ambassadors that the use of the floor. I know that we have a very interesting group of experts and friends, actually, and I have the pleasure to know all of the presenters today, and really looking forward to hear their views. So I'll try to be as brief as I can to present some of our reflections on the results and outcomes of COP26, and also how do we see the way forward to SharmEl-Sheikh. First of all, let me start by saying that COP26 was really a very important moment in our own case in Chile. We finished our presidency of COP25, as Concha was referring, and that was a combination of a lot of work that we did together with the UK. We worked very closely and very hard with the UK in order to deliver on outcomes, especially in the context of the pandemic that hit the world, as you know, in those years. And it was particularly challenging to work and to keep multilateralism alive, really, to make sure that the COP26 was a success. So it was a very important milestone for the UNFCCC process for that reason, but also it was a very important milestone for the process, considering that it showed a clear step towards implementation. And this, of course, refers to the fact that in Glasgow we managed to finish the so-called rulebook, the rulebook of the Paris Agreement, or at least the most important definitions of the rulebook that refers to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and the shift from negotiations of rules towards more action-oriented elements and processes, especially in the context of achieving the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. And one good example of that is precisely Article 6. For many years, Article 6 has been a challenge for us, for the community, for the global community. We failed at achieving an agreement on Article 6 for a few COPs. But in Glasgow, we managed to close the negotiations. And in Glasgow, I think the UK ambassador was already mentioning that there was a hard-fought consensus that was achieved in Glasgow. And Article 6 is a good example of that. There was a great mobilization of political will from everyone to achieve an agreement on Article 6 in markets and non-market approaches. And this seminar and the countries that are around the table in this meeting really reflect the importance of shifting gears really towards implementation. Chile and Singapore, for example, are working together in this direction. And only this morning we had a meeting with Benedict and his team on implementation of Article 6 together, particularly Article 6.2. And it's so interesting and good to hear and see familiar faces in this seminar. And I think it's also interesting to have Costa Rica as well with us today. And one of the topics that we were discussing with Singapore in this regard is that it would be very interesting to see whether we can join up in cooperation with not only bilateral but also including third-party countries like Costa Rica. It would be interesting, and maybe this is a provocative proposal that they can do tonight in Chile to this morning in Singapore. That maybe we should try to explore the possibility of a triangular cooperation on markets between Chile, Singapore, and Costa Rica. That would be extremely interesting and taking advantage of the best examples of our countries to increase our ambition in the line of the principles of the Paris Agreement. So, and as COP26 was a good milestone in the UNFCCC process to solve many issues of the negotiation, and closing the rule book and many other achievements that were conquered really in the negotiations. COP26 was also somehow a departure point for many new issues, and this is really mandates that will come to SharmEl-Sheikh very clearly. And I would like to refer to three issues. I have many others, but I would like to underline three issues. One is that in COP26 there was a clear understanding that we're not going in the right direction. We are not on track to achieve the 1.5 limit on global warming. So in COP26 there was a realization of this difficult situation, and therefore there was a mitigation work program that was launched, and with a call on all parties to increase their ambition in mitigation, so that we close the gap on emissions reductions as has been described by science and particularly the IPCC. So this is a completely new ballgame really for the UNFCCC. So one question is how we're going to be increasing our ambition, considering that the ambition cycle, as described in the Paris Agreement, is a 5-year cycle, and we are still off track of the global goals, but at the same time we're still far away from the next round of NDCs. So we need to find ways, creative ways, to include new elements in our NDCs to face new challenges and achieve new targets to close the ambition gap as fast as we can within this critical decade, as the decision from Glasgow refers to. So that's one element that is that was born out of the consensus in COP26, and we will see a negotiation in Sharm El-Sheikh to have a decision on the mitigation of war program in that respect. The other one is loss and damage, and probably loss and damage is one of those elements that have picked up very high political momentum in the process. And I think that also refers to the planetary limits and the planetary boundaries, really, of what we can do in terms of reducing the emissions. Loss and damage refers to those effects of climate change that result in irreversible damage, or things that go beyond our adaptive capacities. And as we see the effects of climate change in the world, we also see the need to deal with those and address those effects in the long term. So loss and damage is picking up political debate, and probably we will see a very strong push, especially from developing countries in the G77 and China, to have meaningful outcomes in COP27. One of those, of course, will be the operationalization of the Santiago network that was created in COP25 in Madrid. But many other things will also come into the fore, especially when we talk about finance to address and minimize loss and damage. And the third one is finance, and I will refer to that a little later on. But let me also refer to one sort of turning point, really, in between COP25 and COP26, which is the value of nature. And I think this is very interesting because we have seen not only in UNFCCC process, but also in other processes like UNIA, the first multilaterally agreed definition of nature-based solutions that will inspire more climate action on the ground based on nature-based solutions, definitely in the context of our NDCs and climate policies. But also we're looking forward to a successful outcome in the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, later on in the year, on the post-2020 framework that will set clear goals for protection of nature. Of course, climate change is an underlying element in the discussion about protecting nature. So it is very interesting how all these processes are sort of combining targets and combining views in order to advance in the same direction. The other element that I wanted to mention is the ocean. Of course, Chile has been an advocate of the ocean and climate nexus, and we saw just recently in Bonn the first year annual dialogue of the Ocean Climate Nexus, and we hope that by COP27 we will be able to organize and prioritize issues on ocean, so NDCs can use this information from the dialogue for a more articulated climate action to protect the ocean. Among these issues, of course, blue carbon, the ability of ecosystem in the ocean to capture CO2, but also acidification, sea level rise, fisheries, how the fisheries are affected by climate change, and many other elements that are already in many NDCs around the world, especially in developing countries. Finally, I wanted to mention, as I was saying before, a couple of words about finance. Chile, Costa Rica, and Singapore, the three of us are middle-income countries, and developing countries that are middle-income or even high middle-income countries. In this condition, I think it's very important that we collectively develop a narrative of accessing financial flows for our climate targets and policies that are somehow, innovative and not, divorced from what we used to do historically. But we will have to be innovative and look into public-private partnerships and different financial instruments and enabling environments for low emission and resilient investment. And I think it's important to say that Carlos Manuel will refer to this later on from the GEF perspective. But also I think it's important to say that that funds that are available from the GEF, from the GCF, and many others are the traditional sources of funding. And but at the same time, if you look at the assessment of financial flows overall, you will see that the most abundant financial flows are elsewhere, and probably multilateral banks and funds like the GCF or the GEF will have to play a critical role in leveraging those financial flows that are out there, and that middle-income countries such as Costa Rica, Chile, and Singapore will have to be leaders really in trying to match our needs with the financial flows such as investments and others that exist out there, and that we need to catch them and guide them towards our own objectives. So the discussion in COP27 around this issue will be basically around the new collective and quantified goal that needs to be decided before 2025, and that is going to be will be full of qualifiers such as enabling environments, making sure that you are well connected to the private sector, that is well informed by the civil society, and many other things, balance between mitigation and adaptation, many other things that are very valuable for our climate policies. And that is really an opportunity not to be missed. So from Chile, of course, we will continue to be very constructive, pushing for more ambition, and at the same time making sure that everybody plays its role to the extent of increasing that ambition and making sure that COP27 is as successful as it was COP26. So I'll leave it as that. And thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thanks, Julio, for your remarks. It's my pleasure now to invite Ms. Patricia, Chief Negotiator for Costa Rica. Anna,
thank you, and good evening, and good night, and good morning to everybody. It's about 7:40 in San Jose, so we've had a long day, but I think it's a perfect time to go over the things that we are dealing with in terms of our negotiations in climate change. I wanted to thank the organizers for this, and also say buenos dias, embajador, to our ambassador Rojas and his team, and to everybody there in the room. Also to my two colleagues, Theo and Julio, who are good friends, and I'm quite honored to be sharing this time with you guys. It will not be a surprise for you in the forum to see that some of the elements that I'm going to bring in my presentation do resemble the ones that Julio had just mentioned. And I think that this similarities in his position and our position, and probably the ones that he eventually will touch upon, do have to do with the fact not only that we share common interests, but also that we have shared common fights, I think, in the scenario or in the arena of the negotiations. I think that we're moved by similar objectives, and definitely our countries are moving in the same path towards making sure that we align with the objectives of both the Convention and the Paris Agreement. But more importantly, that goes all the way down, not only to the, it doesn't stay on the level of the authorities of a government, but rather goes down and trickles down to society and to our people, and that we can jointly do what is needed to achieve the objectives that we have already signed for. In terms of what happened in Glasgow, I think that there are things that really went quite well, and I think that Julio mentioned that in terms of finishing the rule book that had taken so long, and especially in some of the issues, and he mentioned Article 6, but I also add to that transparency. Article 13 also stayed there for the longest time to be finished. And now we have a framework in which we worked for the longest time, as I said, but now we are going to move, and I think the ambassador of Egypt mentioned this quite well, to the implementation phase. But not necessarily meaning that we are going to just work on action or climate action, but also that we know that there are still some elements that need to be developed. Julio mentioned quite well on Article 6, although we already have a decision on that, there are technical elements that are being dealt with at this point that do need eventually that element or that another framework, a little one probably, but another framework for them to work and to make sure to be that they would be able to be implemented on the realities of our countries. I would like to touch upon the issue of ambition, which is of course something that it is a concept that we use sometimes so loosely. And before probably Glasgow, we tended to adhere that concept to the issue of NDCs, or to the way the NDCs were constructed. And that was the level or the measure of ambition that countries had. And I think that at this point, ambition has turned a little bit. And as Julio mentioned, that this is, and I'm quoting him, a new ballgame. I think this is a completely new ballgame. And there are, it is a game with a different name. And now we have to work on understanding what ambition really means, not attaching it only to NDCs or the achievement of the NDCs, but rather to a broader concept that came out of Glasgow and to this broader scenario of implementation. I think that Glasgow made us ask ourselves really what is this 1.5 in terms of implementation? What does it really mean? What does it really mean in terms of mitigation? How does adaptation plays a role in this transformation or the systemic transition that we are following? And as it was mentioned also by the High Commissioner in terms of finance, how do we work in mobilizing these private and public funds to make sure that we achieve the goals that we have? So ambition goes beyond the achievement of the NDCs or even the definition of the goals that we have, our objectives in our own NDCs, but rather in a broader sense of how this all comes together and works toward the final objective. We do not, when we talk about ambition, we should not only talk about how is it good to reassure it and to make sure that we talk about it and that it's a present thing, but also what it entails. And I think that Glasgow managed to have results on that in terms of the indication on fossil fuels. And even though the result in the cover decision at the end was not necessarily the first or the one that would have been probably the better, it is a good step forward, and we're moving, I think, towards the right objective. There were indications on energy transition, and of course indications of the participation of different sectors in order to achieve again the goals. So I think that ambition went a little bit further than just NDCs, and it came out as a good result, at least on those three issues. I think that the answers or bigger answers in terms of these results in implementation will come out of the mitigation, ambition, and implementation work program. And that is something that we will have to see at COP27 to see if we can manage to, again, find good results to be able or to make sure that that ambition is present and it's not only a word. I think that there are conversations that we need to have in terms of ambition as well in our preparation for the GST and in the dialogues that we're going to have on that, in the dialogues that we're having and in the narrative that we're using in terms of the definition of the global goal on adaptation. Julio mentioned this a little bit, and I think that this is a conversation that demands us to go way beyond the definition of a number, and it obligates us to see further than that and to see how that could be, again, included in the processes that we follow nationally in order to achieve the objectives. I think that the role of science, and Julio mentioned this as well, was well portrayed in Glasgow, and we managed not only to take note of the reports, but acknowledge the reports as a reference and as a source, as a tool for us to work. And that should probably be the right way to keep on doing or addressing science if we ought to have good data for the reports and for the revisions that we have to do in the years to come. In terms of GGA, a global goal on adaptation, as I said, the temptation probably to define a number is always there. We've done it in the past, and we know the goal that was set in the Paris Agreement. But we have also learned, I think, in the hard way, that there are processes that need to be followed, and that the definition of a goal or a number by itself will not really comply with the necessities and the needs that are present there. So I think that is a discussion that will come in Glasgow, in Egypt, and it will really have to, we will really have to go in depth into that discussion in order to make sure that whatever we decide at the end does really come again in terms of what we need. I think that definition of that goal, and this is something that we work on, has to take in account how does that goal at the end will work in working with the inequalities in our social part of our countries, and how that addresses the needs. Again, way much more than just the definition of a number. Julio touched upon finance, and I think that indeed that is something quite important. This time in Glasgow, we went over finance in a couple of items. One that had to do with the second expert dialogue that was that was created as part of the process to define the new goal, and also one that touched upon the revision of the adaptation fund. Both quite important discussions. I think that the one that has to do with the new goal has to step a little bit to try to address some of the issues that have been there, not going back to definitions that has already happened, or not going back to trying to define things that have already been defined in terms of, for instance, the scope of the goal, and how is it going to again address the needs and the things that we need to follow. And I say this because I was in the first dialogue, and my sensation there was that there is some, I would say some, not fear, but there is some resistance to try to, talk about some of these issues that will be part or will be part of the elements that need to be addressed in order to define this goal eventually. So I think that is something that we have to work on. And in terms of the adaptation fund, there were good discussions on funding of the adaptation fund. Some of these discussions happen in the room of Article 6, but also I think that, again, as I said in the beginning, adaptation also has a broader scope, and I think that this is something and that we will see also in Egypt. Julio mentioned loss and damages, and I think that loss and damages indeed will be part and a great part of the discussion in Egypt at COP27. And I'd say this because my sense is that both adaptation and loss and damages are like the younger brothers of an older brother called mitigation. And I think that these brothers are no longer as young as they were some years ago. Now they have taken some shape, and now they are stepping in their own bodies, and they're doing their own thing. And I think that we as negotiators are seeing that, and are seeing the negotiation going a little bit towards putting some light into these issues. For countries like ours, like Costa Rica, of course, this is important, and of course, being able to being able to acquire funds for the processes and the projects that we have is quite important. And I think that this discussion will have a really good, and I hope a really good in-depth conversation in Egypt. I think that the acknowledgement of, and this is something that was also done in Glasgow, the acknowledgement that the support is needed is also a good one. It might be one of those things that you already knew, but you needed to have that really acknowledged and really in writing to make it real. And I think that the High Commissioner mentioned that the importance of support and that it is something that was present there. And finally, I'd just like to touch upon a couple of things that deal more with the structure of the discussions rather than just the content of those. First, I think that something that really worked in Glasgow, and that it not started in Glasgow, but started way before that in the July Ministerial, was the participation of ministers quite early in the process. I think that what happened in the July Ministerial in London and then was replicated in the pre-COP in Milan and then happened to have a space also in Glasgow is this early participation of ministers and ministers that were in charge of specific thematic issues and were able to come back on a daily basis to report and to talk with the presidencies of what was happening and explore ways to move the conversations forward was quite definitive to have a good result. Another thing that I think we should have in mind, and hopefully, again, on the issue of ministers, a process like that or a structure like that hopefully will be replicated also in Egypt, because I think it proved to be quite good. The other thing that we have to keep an eye on is that the agenda for Egypt is quite vast. It's a big agenda. And that will touch upon the time allocated for negotiations and for discussions. And that is something that we have to keep an eye on, because we might be quite ambitious and we might be quite eager to get into the issues. But if time is a variable and is an issue that we have to manage, then we have to make sure that we manage it well in terms that the issues that are part of the agenda get the allocated time that it's needed for them to be discussed. In terms of some narrative, I think that for countries in Latin America, it's good that the narrative that will address vulnerabilities of our region, it's also included there. I know that there are some possibilities of including or recognizing the special circumstances of specific regions. I think that we need to have a conversation of acknowledging special circumstances also of other regions that also have great vulnerabilities, and that has to be acknowledged as well. And I think the last thing in terms of the structure or what happened, I think it's the participation of the private sector. What we saw in Glasgow was a great participation of the private sector, probably larger than ever before. And that is a tendency that we have to push for. And I think that's something that needs to be done. This quite large agenda that we are addressing, a lot of different climate actions cannot be achieved only by governments. And the participation of the private sector has to be motivated and has to be there and has to be present. And I think that is something for us to look forward to. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Anna, for your comments. Can I gently encourage the speakers to use about 7 minutes at most? So with that, let me invite Joe to speak as CN for Singapore.
Thank you, and a very good morning to everyone. 7 minutes, it's not easy to... I've actually prepared a deck of slides to try to guide us through. I want to firstly say hello to my friends in Costa Rica and Chile. Honored to be speaking immediately after them. So, hola from Singapore. We talk so much about CCUS, but I think this combination of Chile, Costa Rica, and Singapore is a new CCS that we should encourage, and I welcome Julio's idea. Excellencies, Peter, thank you for this. 7 minutes, I'll try to breeze through the slide pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So here's the overview. And I'll try to take a slightly different take. I'll talk a little bit about Glasgow, but more importantly, what I want to convey is how Glasgow has influenced Singapore's thinking and how it has guided and our response. And we have actually taken a lot of steps in a very short period of time to get things implemented. So that is the purpose of my presentation. So next slide, please. So what did we achieve in Glasgow? I have listed down 6, but they are no means exclusive. There are other areas. Julio mentioned oceans, others. But the 6 here are what we feel are the key achievements. And the first is actually strengthening the multilateral system. And not many note, but it's the first time the US is back. We have Turkey and Iraq who have ratified the Paris Agreement. And that means we have only 4 countries left that have not. And for those who follow the multilateral agreements, this is a significant achievement. Anna mentioned the other important element is that private sector has now been co-opted into the exercise. So private sector involvement has increased. Not mentioned is the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, which brings together 1.3 trillion of assets of managers into this process. And I think this is a second point that an important point that should be mentioned under the rubric of strengthening the multilateral global approach to addressing climate change. Second is it has helped to close the emission gap. Granted, we are not there yet at 1.5, but Glasgow has put in place a number of elements that is supposed to guide parties to work towards their goal in an accelerated manner. We have a work program on mitigation, which must be delivered in Sharm El-Sheikh. We have regular ministerial roundtables now, which is supposed to elevate political discussions. We have annual synthesis reports, which is supposed to provide everyone where we are in terms of 1.5 degree goal. And we have a very strong request to parties to strengthen and revisit their NDCs by 2022. Significantly, it has mainstream 1.5. Prior to Glasgow, we have difference of views. Do you aim towards well below 2 degrees? Do you pursue 1.5 degree? In Glasgow, we have settled that debate. We now parties agreed to resolve to achieve 1.5 degrees. Third, there was greater support on issues of developing countries. So adaptation and loss and damage were raised. Now we have the commitment by developed countries to at least double their adaptation finance by 2025 from 2019 levels. We have launched a 2-year Glasgow SharmEl-Sheikh work program to operationalize the global goal on adaptation. We're supposed to enhance the adaptation actions and support. We have further operationalized the Santiago network for loss and damage. And this has taken added importance following the IPCC, latest IPCC reports, which zoomed in on the issue of losses and damages, maladaptation, and overshooting of 1.5 degrees. Fourth, it has completed the Paris rulebook. So Anna and Julio has mentioned this already. Article 6 is one of the key issues that have been outstanding for 6 years, and very pleased that Singapore played a small role to bring this issue across the finishing line. Fifth, we presented on climate finance. Developed countries, Germany and Canada have presented a plan that commits the developed countries to achieve this goal by 2023 at the latest. And six, we have meaningful partnerships. So we have the Marrakesh Partnership, we have various Race to Zero, Race to Resilience. But two things not mentioned by the previous speakers is a 10-year Glasgow work program on action for climate empowerment, which is to galvanize ground-up actions and enable more community partners to pursue sustainable development, and encourage future COPs to organize opportunities for youth engagement. So this is another important point, and Egypt has already committed to organizing a youth event at COP26. Next slide, please. So those were just some of the key achievements, but I thought I'd highlight 5 significant shifts of Glasgow. And they are all listed there, so I won't really waste too much time of your time. But if you look on the left, it says what the Paris Agreement says, and you look on the right column, it says what the Glasgow Climate Pact says. Quite significant. I mentioned the 1.5, well below 1.5. In Glasgow, we have resolved to achieve 1.5. Net zero goal. In Paris, it says let's achieve net zero balance between sinks and emissions in the second half of the century. In Glasgow, it says by or around mid-century. Ambition mechanism. We have the global stocktake, which is supposed to encourage parties to update their NDCs every 5 years. In Glasgow, we said, why don't you start doing it next year for your existing NDCs? So parties are expected to revisit and strengthen the NDCs by SharmEl-Sheikh. And very pleased that Egypt has actually already updated their NDC. So for those who haven't looked at it, please do so. Climate finance, again, not since Copenhagen have we got another commitment, and Glasgow delivered a new commitment, and I mentioned that already, adaptation finance. And lastly, also significantly, for the first time, fossil fuels have been brought into a COP decision and UNFCCC process. So a decision was made to accelerate the phase down of unabated coal and the phase out of inefficient fuel subsidies. So those are the 5 big shifts that I thought I should highlight to this group. So maybe next slide. A short publicity stint, Singapore role at COP. And we have traditionally been a strong advocate of the multilateral system. And at all COPs, or at key points in the COP process, Singapore ministers were involved in terms of trying to bridge positions and facilitate outcomes. And I won't go through them, but the latest was in Glasgow, where our minister managed to facilitate a good outcome on Article 6. Next slide. So what is our response? I'll outline 7. And really this section is just to show you that how COP decisions can influence national actions. So the first is we took a decision coming back from Glasgow very shortly after, 2 months after, to raise our climate ambition. Now we have decided to raise our climate ambition to achieve net zero emissions by around mid-century. We haven't yet zoomed in on the specific year, but the intention is to consult all stakeholders and arrive at the decision before Sharm El-Sheikh. So I put down this slide also to show you the evolution of Singapore's pledges. We started with a BAU. There were some concerns about what the BAU is or meant. We moved to an energy intensity target, and then we moved to an absolute cap, and then now we are updating our targets again. So in that short period of time, you see we are constantly updating our, and so the point I'm really making is that in the UNFCCC process, the NDC is just meant to put in your best effort and improve over time, and that's what we have been doing. Second, next slide. Second response was that we announced to help us achieve our net zero ambition, we have announced that we will raise our carbon tax. And if you see in the chart here, it's quite a steep increase. So we are currently at 5, and we're the first country in Southeast Asia to introduce a carbon tax. Within the next 2 years, we will raise it 5 times to $25. And then 2 years later, we'll move it to 45. And then by 2030, the idea is to move to achieve carbon tax between $50 and $80. This is actually quite a steep climb, and the idea really is to try to agenda a whole of economy shift towards net zero. Next slide. Unique feature of our carbon tax is to use the tax revenue to support the energy transition through grants to businesses as well as to households to try to get them to shift to more energy efficient appliances. Next slide. The third response is recognizing that we have to move to net zero. So for those who don't know, Singapore has already moved out of coal early on. We are now 95% natural gas, but we are alternative energy disadvantage. To help us clean this energy mix, we need cleaner sources of fuel. Hydrogen has that potential, and we're investing a lot in partnership with universities, in partnership with countries to see what we can do to develop, deploy the technologies necessary, as well as to build up the supply chains and the regulatory standards. Next slide. Fourth, started importing renewable energy. So for those who follow the Straits Times, they did a very nice article yesterday about this particular project, which I listed. And so the project is really an experiment to see how we can tap on the renewable energy of our neighbors by starting on a small pilot. And in this project, we are actually bringing energy from Laos, where they have ample renewable energy through hydro, and to bring that energy to Singapore through Thailand and Malaysia. So it's not an easy exercise, but again, the hope is that through this pilot, it will be a pathfinder for ASEAN region-wide energy grid. And our goal, of course, is to import 4 gigawatts of electricity by 2035. I don't even mention the more ambitious project of Sun Cable for those who wish to look up, read it out from that, which brings in green electricity from Australia, as far as Australia, down to Singapore. And we, of course, we're also doing projects with Malaysia and Indonesia. Next. Our next response is that since Glasgow, we have been actively forging climate partnerships with key partners. Very pleased many of them are here with us. And really, these partnerships are meant to focus our efforts on developing the solutions we need to help us to move faster in this energy transition. Next slide. And Julio mentioned carbon markets, and this is one area that we are also looking at actively. And the idea is to expand our mitigation options, number one. But more importantly, we want to show that carbon credits can be a new source of funding to move investments to areas where we need, so that we can all benefit from this and raise ambition. So recently, we have signed an MOU with somewhere as far as Morocco, and we hope to be able to follow this up with other agreements with other partners in the near future, including many who are here with us today. Next. Lastly, we also recognize that moving this, getting to net zero is not just a government action. We need a whole-of-nation approach to dealing with this big challenge. And the Singapore Green Plan is our roadmap towards this. It's meant to galvanize a whole-of-nation movement on sustainability and across 5 different pillars. I've listed out with some of the key targets. Every year in Parliament, the government will have to provide updates on how we are moving towards these goals. At the same time, at Parliament, we also try to do better each time. Just to signal, right below is, apart from citizenry, government will take a leadership role, and we have set quite an ambitious target within the civil service. Next slide. Ending off where we started in the beginning of the seminar, which is some of the issues, priorities that SharmEl-Sheikh will have to take up. I listed some of these, and it is a no-brainer. Number one is really we have to get greater ambition. Under that first bullet, we have to, a key deliverable is the mitigation work program, which Julio mentioned. We need to deliver that at SharmEl-Sheikh, and that will then set a program of how to get countries to go beyond their NDCs, move better, and to enhance their NDCs over time. Anna mentioned, and Julio also, adaptation and loss and damage. These are key issues of interest to developing countries, and COP27 would have to show some progress in these areas. Green finance, developed countries, Germany and Canada is continuing to take the lead to see how they can move the timeline faster to achieve the 100 billion goal. But beyond that, I think in Glasgow, we managed to galvanize private sector finance through GFANS. In Sharm El-Sheikh, we have to see what we can do to galvanize finance from the MDBs as well as IFIs. And we have an important visitor coming to Singapore from Egypt in the next day or two. And he will have a very important role in terms of galvanizing this support from the MDBs and IFIs. And lastly, we have to make progress on the initiatives that were launched in Glasgow and launch new ones. And the ambassador from Egypt mentioned the 10 thematic days already where COP will be organized around. He did mention that there are also 17 initiatives or 15 initiatives that Egypt is hoping to also announce at Sharm El-Sheikh. So we hope to see progress in these various areas at Sharm El-Sheikh. And these initiatives are really meant to show that beyond the agreements, action is being taken on the ground. And with that, I think I end my presentation. Next slide. Yes. So next slide. So if you need more information on this, please refer to my slide. And I hope I give you a short snapshot of what we have in store. Action, implementation is the order of the day. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Joe, also for emphasizing the importance of international partnerships. So next we have Jenny Mega from Chile. You have the floor.
Thank you for this invitation, and good morning everyone in Singapore, and good night for my colleagues here in this part of the world. Before I start this participation in this seminar, I was talking to my son. He's 8 years old, and we were discussing about the time difference between Chile and Singapore. And he told me, "Mommy, you will be talking to the future." So I was thinking, what we should say if we can have the chance to talk to the future. How would you say it? Like, we are sorry because we didn't do enough. We didn't take the action. Having so much information, we have in our hands a lot of information on a scientific basis to do a lot of actions. And we know that we are on time to do a lot of actions, and we are not taking so seriously this problem. That and those are the main focus in the last COP. For Chile, for example, having holding the presidency of COP25 in 2019. That was the last COP before the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We had the opportunity to think about it, to think how we can, a country like Chile, how we can help to the process, having so little emissions in the global perspective, but what we can help to see this process differently. So we think that the main issue here is taking science seriously, taking the informs and the reports of IPCC very seriously in order to change the view that we design policies and we design the not only international policy, but also domestic policy as well. Having climate as a transversal issue into the perspective that country has to the development. For now, for example, taking the particular case of Chile. We have the opportunity to change our commitment in 2020. We present a new NDC, an updated NDC, and consider all this perspective related to science and to the information that we had in mind. And considering especially the information presented in the special report of the IPCC, the 1.5 report, we try to include all those views in our NDC. We try to present a more transparent indicator, having we change our carbon intensity indicator to we move from that to a carbon budget indicator, which is more transparent and is more in line with the scientific vision to this problem. Also, we change our view related with our trajectory of the emission. We commit a peak of our emission by 2025, which is very aligned with the result of the IPCC report, because we are committed to really change the trend that we have in the emission, to think in a transition from an economy which is developing, having a lot of emission, but trying to reduce emission, but not damage our economy. And with that also, we wanted to be very transparent. So we took one of the principles of the Paris Agreement in special importance. We took the Article 13 of Paris Agreement, and we have prepared of our report, of our BORs. We are now preparing our last BOR, is the fifth one. But we are trying to move into the requirement of the Paris Agreement regarding transparency, because we have a lot of commitment into the table. I am not going to talk of the details of the Glasgow Pact, because the previous speaker had a lot of details about this. But I wanted to mention that in the last years, we have seen in the international negotiation that the conversation or the discussion moves from very important commitment to implementation. We are trying to move those discussions towards the implementation. How can we do that? How we can take years of planning policy to implementation policy? It's really difficult if you think like concretely how that means to countries, how that means to domestic policy. For us, for Chile, that means two important advances. The first one, we design a roadmap to 2050. I'm sorry. We commit carbon neutrality by 2050, but also commit a roadmap to go there, because we know that we can promise, or we can commit a lot of special goals or very ambitious goals in the future. But if you cannot implement action from now, you are not able to commit. You are not able to fulfill the commitment. So it's really important to see how you are preparing your roadmap in order to commit your goals in the future. It's not only to commit and having more and more ambitious goals if you are not doing any action right now. We know that. For that reason, we launched our long-term strategy last year, And in that strategy, we also we try to design this roadmap. We work a lot with different sectors of our economy, and we put in that strategy the vision of those sectors and the climate visions and the development visions of those sectors to 2050. The idea is to have a perspective of what you should achieve in the short term, mid-term, and long term in order to really reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And with that in mind, we also launched our climate change law just 3 weeks ago. And with that, we are strengthening our institutional arrangement to really put climate policy into the main core of the planning, of the government planning. In this vision of a development, a sustainable development, and also in the vision of having the carbon neutrality in the future. But my main message this night for me and this morning for you, I think, is how we can really move into implementation. As Julio mentioned, we are trying to look, for example, Article 6 as a really concrete way to involve, for example, to private sector into the implementation. And we know that this is a good opportunity to accelerate the process, but it's not the only one. That is the important thing. We need to implement really hard policies in our country. This, unfortunately, this is not the time to relay all our hopes in next technology or in market. This is not the time to do that. We need to enforce real hard policies right now. And for that, we need the commitment not only of environmental ministries. We need to really involve the whole economy in our countries. That is the message that our new government is trying to put into the table here in Chile. Now we are facing a huge transition, like a green transition in Chile, because we are trying to put this green transition not only in the planification of environmental policy, but also in the planification and in the planning process of the whole economy. So for that, we have this policy instrument that I mentioned before, the law and the strategy, and also the instrument that we hope will be result of the negotiation, the international negotiation. For example, the result of the negotiation of climate finance, because for countries like us, it's difficult to have access to really innovative technology, because we are not a country that developed technology. So the international arena is really important for us to have access to that and to move in that direction. And also, we need to focus our efforts into cost and to know the cost of adaptation. That is why loss and damage negotiation is so important. We need to have in mind that if we do the right things, and if we can develop and design the best policies, the cost of the adaptation will be less than if we don't do anything. So for that reason, we need to put those costs into the calculation, into the equation, because it's really important to to have the whole picture in mind. So I don't want to take so much of your time. I didn't want to go deep into the negotiation and in the result of the last COP, because as I mentioned before, the previous speaker well explained the result of the last process. But my last message is something that I mentioned already, is please think in the implementation. Please, we need to move the conversation and the negotiation and everything to implementation. I think one of the best thing about Glasgow, and in the previous presentation was mentioned. In Glasgow, we were talking about, for example, fossil fuels and what happened with and what will happen with fossil fuels, concrete implementation. So I think that is a good opportunity to move from this emissions commitment, which maybe sound a little bit less concrete, to real concrete policy. We have to get rid of fossil fuels, for example. So with that, I would like to thank, and I hope to, if you have any question or any point to discuss, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, for also emphasizing the importance of implementation. Next, we have Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Then thanks to the governments of Singapore, Chile, and Costa Rica, as well as the acting presidency, the UK, and the new incoming presidency, Egypt, on the COP27. I got a challenge here because I'm a former Minister of Environment and Energy from the government of Costa Rica. Nevertheless, I'm now the CEO of the Global Environment Facility, and I'm tempted to talk about Costa Rica. But let me convey with you all the three messages. And yes, I will talk a little bit about Costa Rica. First, Chile and Costa Rica and other Latin American countries created this like-minded coalition, ILAC, in the process of COP21, the Paris Agreement. The work that Costa Rica, Chile, and these other countries did was fabulous because they brought a high doses of ambition into the Paris Agreement. And we can feel that these countries accomplished a big goal. But now I see a need for a ILAC 2.0, because even though we got the Paris Agreement, we got the rule book in place, we need to implement. And the need for implement is not immune to political challenges and ideological challenges. And implementation will be based on resource mobilization and financing the climate transitions. And here's where I see some big political challenges. Even though we got, the Paris Agreement and decisions on the rule book, I see a lot of countries conditioning climate action to more funding. And I think that ILAC 2.0 can give us that leadership and that vision and that ambition with regards to the elements associated to resource mobilization for climate action. And we need to find middle ground so we can achieve this. Costa Rica, Chile, Singapore are countries that without any doubt will be performing in terms of implementing their NDC and their compromises with the Paris Agreement with or without international ODA. Because these countries have understood that it's in their own self-interest to mitigate climate change and to adapt to climate change. Unfortunately, this is not the same situation understanding in many other nations around the planet. in many other nations within G77. And this is something that is extremely important. And I think that a new version of ILAC can be a great idea. And who knows, probably this event triggered that new ILAC, where like-minded countries with high ambition on climate action, and I'm talking about countries who really understand that there is a need to mobilize financial resources from more sources, and that conditioning climate action for more funding is not acceptable in the context of the global climate crisis. This is my first message. My second message is around Costa Rica. And as having been 3 times Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, I saw myself the transition that happened in Costa Rica. Costa Rica has net zero emissions from the electric sector and net zero emissions from land use and land use change. By the way we produce our electricity and deforestation and where we produce our food are the 2 biggest sources of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Costa Rica today has no emissions out of these 2 sectors, and yes, we got challenges in other sectors like transportation, like waste management, and other sectors. But Costa Rica was able to do this in the last 30 years through innovative approaches, right policies, building capacities, using the science, and a lot of political stability. At the same time that we were able to go 100% renewable in the electric sector and double the size of our forests, the economy tripled, the population doubled. And most of that achievement, doubling the size of our forests, reverting the rate of deforestation, doubling the size of the forest, and going 100% renewable energy, was mainly done with domestic financial resources. Yes, Costa Rica is a eligible country to the GEF. Yes, Costa Rica can access the Green Climate Fund. And yes, Costa Rica has been using bilateral cooperation for many, many years. But Costa Rica also understood that those resources, assistance for development, was basically resources that can trigger political processes, do the piloting of innovative approaches, but the bulk of the task should be done using public expenditures and bringing the private sector on board. And I think that that is a very good lesson. Costa Rica invested in the last 20, 30 years, $11.5 billion in the electric transition, and has invested around $1 billion through a tax on fossil fuels in the investment in the forest sectors. And I think that, Singapore, Costa Rica, Chile, and a handful of other enlightened developing nations can move the needle forward in terms of being able to overcome these big political challenges, the challenge that we have at the convention, whereby many countries need more funding, whereby other and many countries are conditioning action to more funding. A very interesting report was done in Costa Rica in 2019 that did a cost-benefit analysis of fully decarbonizing our economy by 2050. And that report told us that the economic benefits outweigh many times the cost of the transition in our economy towards a zero-emission economy. And I believe that's the same case in many other developing countries. So just a side note here on what Costa Rica has done, and basically, bringing these elements into this discussion, whereby I strongly believe that the big challenge, again, is how do we mobilize domestic resources more efficiently, because there won't be enough resources coming from ODA, traditional ODA, to really narrow the global financial gap in climate action. And my last point here, we are the Global Environment Facility, the largest environmental fund. We work on not just climate, but also all the multilateral environmental agreements. And we do a lot of strategic thinking on finance. So here's what we have in front of us. We need to understand how do we narrow the global financial gap in the climate arena. As of today, we are investing from all sources around $850 billion in climate action. The needs are around $2 to $3 trillion. So we are basically investing, as of today, 35 to 40% of what we need to be investing today to be on track for the 1.5. So there's a huge gap there. Now, let me break down that information in relevant information. 80% of those $850 billion that all countries are investing today in climate action, 80% of that are resources that are being invested in developed nation, industrialized nation. This is what Japan invests in Japan. This is what Germany invests in Germany. So the other 20% is a mixture of what all the rest of the planet does invest in public expenditures, what goes from the north to the south in terms of climate mitigation, and very little is being invested in climate adaptation. And yes, of course, one of the most important relevant outcomes of Glasgow was this political commitment to level up the flow of resources for climate adaptation vis-a-vis climate mitigation, because for the many developing nations, climate adaptation is their priority, particularly the less developed nation and small island developed states. That is extremely important. So how do we narrow that global financial gap? There's a combination of actions, and I will conclude with this. There's a combination of actions that are needed. First, we need to stop immediately investing in activities that contribute to climate change. We need to really, and very quickly stop financing the oil and gas sectors and all of those other economic sectors that are direct contributors to climate change. So when we stop, and this cannot be done from one day to another, it will take us a decade, but we need to begin now. If we stop investing in climate, in the contribution to climate change, the cost of reverting climate change will decrease dramatically. So policy coherence is at the center of these actions, and this should be done in every single country. The GEF, particularly in this new cycle, which we call GEF 8, which will go from 2022 to 2026, will be working closely with governments in terms of generating more policy coherence. So by the end of this decade, all countries will have the right policies whereby all public investment and private investment are totally aligned with the Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, today, very little of the public and private investments are aligned with the Paris Agreement, and most of those investments are contributing to climate change, but not only to climate change, to pollute the environment and to lose nature as a whole. So the GEF looks to work with countries in a comprehensive manner so we can achieve multiple benefits across different sectors. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. The GEF is the trusted partner of the countries in climate actions, and we thank for the possibility to be here in contributing so this event can be important, relevant, and who knows, it can be a game changer as we go towards COP27. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlos. Now we'll hear Benedict Chia, Director from NCCS, to share his perspectives. But just want to highlight, looking at the clock, that we'll forgo the question and answer session. After Benedict has spoken, I will invite Ambassador Concha and Rojas to Ambassador Concha to say final remarks, and then I'll close the session. Benedict.
So good morning, Your Excellencies, friends. Thanks for coming for this session. I know I'm one of the last speaker before we close up. And thanks, Peter, for organizing this and inviting me for the session itself. I think it's a great session for us to come together and reflect on what we have achieved last year and what is the road ahead as we head up towards COP27 and beyond. On what I'll speak about, I'll focus more on Article 6, since the other speakers have really covered fairly comprehensively all the other areas outside Article 6 itself. So in essence, if we look at Article 6 is really about cooperative approaches. It's really about countries coming together, working together to increase ambition, both in terms of mitigation as well as in terms of adaptation itself, as well as other areas on climate change, which are important. And I think that is really the spirit of Article 6, which we hope to operationalize itself. On Article 6, for us, there are three key reflections or perhaps significance of Article 6, which I think it's worth highlighting itself. First is really about environmental integrity. And if you look at current carbon markets, especially carbon markets, and how it has existed over the last couple of years, over the last decade or so, it has been riddled with a lot of criticisms that there's a lot of greenwashing. Environmental integrity is low. And I think what Article 6 has done is Article 6 has essentially raised the bar itself. And it has raised the bar in three areas. One is that in Article 6.2 and 6.4, which are the two key market-based cooperative approaches under Article 6, the concept of additionality has been enshrined. And what additionality means is that the project, or rather the project that is in place, the carbon crediting project, would not have taken place in the absence of the crediting mechanism itself. And that's significant because there are a number of crediting projects out there which have very weak, or in some cases, no additionality rules itself. So that's one area in which the bar has been raised. The other area in which the bar has been raised is about baselines, conservative baselines, and tightening the baselines itself. And I think for those of you who are more familiar with carbon markets itself, what's the significance of baselines? The baselines are essentially the level in which you measure the improvement against. And if you set the baseline in a very loose manner, it means that you can generate a lot of credits, compared to if you set the baseline in a conservative manner. And again, that's one key criticism that's been leveled at carbon markets itself. Baselines are set very loosely. It assumes very weak assumptions in terms of what sort of technology could have been deployed in a hypothetical business as usual case. And therefore, a lot of credits are being generated. And then the accusation comes in that all this is hot air itself. So by tightening the baselines, actually, you ensure that whatever flow that comes out is actually credible itself. And the last area in which integrity has been raised, and this is probably the most important area, is double counting. No double counting. This essentially means corresponding adjustments, which means that when a seller sells carbon credits to a buyer, what the seller needs to do is that it needs to adjust its inventories upwards. So if country A sells to country B 1 million tons of carbon credits, country A needs to report 1 million tons more on its domestic inventories itself. And this is a new concept which has never been in place within carbon markets. And I think this is a critical piece to ensure that whatever transactions, whatever cooperation we do under carbon markets meets a certain bar itself. So that's one key area which Article 6 brings to the table. The other area in which Article 6 brings to the table is under 6.2. So 6.2 is essentially a broad cooperative framework that brings in voluntary programs such as gold standard, such as VERA, to play within the compliance space itself, to contribute within the compliance space. It also brings in bilateral engagements. So if Singapore were to talk to Costa Rica, were to talk to Chile, and we come up with some agreement, it allows that agreement, that cooperation, to be parked under Article 6, and for the units generated to be used to meet international emissions reduction obligations itself. And that's significant because if you look at the previous mechanism under Kyoto Protocol, if you want to use credits, every single credit use must be under the central mechanism itself. So this is under CDM, this is under the joint implementation mechanism and whatnot. So this essentially opens the window broader. It brings in more players to collaborate upon. And I think that's key. In the earlier speakers, we have heard this point about more players coming on board, the private sector coming on board in a much bigger way. So that's the second aspect of Article 6, which is important. The third area of Article 6, which we think is absolutely critical, is that it enlarges the space. It ensures that there's much broader flow through beyond just what happens within the strict remit and the strict boundaries of Article 6 itself. And here the example I'd like to cite is that if you look at 6.4, if you look at share of proceeds, which is essentially contributions to the adaptation fund, has been increased. So in the previous mechanism, it was 2%. Now it's 5%. So that's an increase itself. And the funding will go to support adaptation work itself. The other area is what we call OMGE, which is overall reduction in global emissions itself. So this is an additional discount, and this is a 2% discount. Previously, it was 0. And that essentially means that whatever we do on Article 6 should lead to a reduction in overall global emissions. And this broadening, ensuring that there's greater flow through of some of the key benefits of Article 6 beyond the individual project boundaries, I think it's important to ensure that we meet some of our broader climate goals itself. So those are the three key areas that we think is important. First, environmental integrity standards have definitely been increased. Second, you bring in more players on board, and I think that's absolutely critical because to address climate change, it cannot be something that only governments work amongst ourselves. If we have more people around the table pushing and moving towards the same goal, it gives us a better chance of achieving the temperature goals that we lay out. The third area is about much broader translation, ensuring that whatever that we do in one area actually does translate and cascade outwards, and that we do achieve much broader, our broader climate objectives. Following the conclusion of Article 6, Singapore has been working closely with numerous countries. We have been speaking to multiple countries out there. So far, we have signed 3 Memorandum of Understandings or Letter of Intent, some of which I think Joseph mentioned in his presentation slides itself. We signed with Indonesia, we have signed with Ghana, and we have just recently signed with Morocco. We are in the midst of discussions with various other countries, more than 10 in total, on other forms of MOU and going beyond the MOU on specific projects, specific implementation frameworks itself. And I think some of the people in this room, some of the countries, Costa Rica, Chile, are countries that we are quite keen, including Egypt itself. We are in discussions, and I think we are quite keen to see how we can collaborate. And during our discussions with these countries, we see Article 6 collaborations as bringing about win-win outcomes. And we see win-win outcomes happening in 3 key areas itself. The first, which has been talked about throughout speeches, is about ambition. It's about increasing mitigation ambition itself. So we are focusing our Article 6 collaborations on above NDC or above emissions targets activities. So the aim of this is to unlock additional abatement which would have not occurred otherwise. So Singapore is happy to contribute to this space: finance, technology, project structuring, project origination, project management. And we work together, we unlock additional abatement that would not have been achieved otherwise, and we find a way to share that additional abatement that has been unlocked. So that's one key area of win-win. The second key area of win-win is investments. And if you look at the kind of projects we're looking at, if you look at the kind of prices that we could potentially be investing, actually it brings a sizable investment stream for carbon credits itself to the country. And this carbon credit stream would help unlock a broader investment within the project itself. So we have been talking to some countries on projects like electric buses, for example. Carbon crediting stream that we bring in would make the electric bus project viable. And the total amount of investment into the country is not going to be small. It's going to be quite significant itself. So that's the second area where we see win-win. Investment flows into the country, into the host country. The third area, which I think is critically important, is sustainable development benefits. So through our discussions with various partner countries out there, potential partner countries out there, we have always emphasized that whatever Article 6 projects we do must benefit people on the ground. It must result in better livelihoods. It must result in better sustainable development outcomes. Things like lower air pollution, reduction in waste management, better recycling rates, and the type of projects and the type of SDG goals that we achieve depends on different projects itself. But we think it's absolutely important because at the end of the day, Article 6 is not just a project whereby the financiers put together something and which result in carbon credits. It is something that at the end of the day, the people on the ground must be able to look at it, must be able to reflect on it and say that this is beneficial for us. It has improved my livelihood. It has improved my well-being. I'm behind it and I support it. So those are the three key areas in which we have found the discussion to be particularly useful. And when we structure discussions with various countries, we seek to maximize gains, win-win outcomes in these three areas: abatement, investment, and sustainable development gains itself. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben, also for flagging to us that carbon markets play an important role in mitigation as well. So, unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A, but should anyone in the audience or virtual means, if you have questions, please send to us and we will liaise with the speakers. So we've come to an end. Firstly, on behalf of the Embassy of Chile, Embassy of Costa Rica, and MTI, I'd like to thank everyone, both virtual participants and those who have come physically, for you honoring us with your presence. So I believe all of us benefited from the various sharing. So now I don't intend to summarize a full summary of all the good points that were made. Just three things stand out to me, and I will just highlight them and thereafter close the meeting. First message, which is very clear, is there's a shared view that COP26 is a big win for multilateralism. Not only multilateralism, but the UNFCCC's rules-based system and international cooperation. A lot of speakers refer to that. It is significant that COP26 adopted a number of decisions envisioning turning the 2020s into a decade of climate action. However, all the speakers also highlighted that work does not end with the decisions adopted at Glasgow. So that's the first message that comes out very clearly. Second, another message that clearly highlighted by everyone, that more needs to be done. In this regard, it is apt that Egypt, as our presidency for COP27, has identified implementation as an overarching theme for its presidency, which is very important. And the speakers also highlighted the importance of implementation. So our priority should be to build on the outcomes of COP26 and continue to demonstrate that all parties, I want to underline all parties, are making efforts to close gaps across mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage was highlighted a number of times, and finance, while enhancing international cooperation and collaboration. International cooperation and collaboration is very important for a global problem such as climate change. The last message that came out, which I tried to distill, that although was not directly raised by the speakers, but it came up in the interventions, sharing, the key expectation for COP27 would be the adaptation of the mitigation work program, which was endorsed at COP26. The mandate was provided in COP26. So in our view, it provides a valuable opportunity for all of us, all parties, to put in place necessary enablers to accelerate the transition to a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. So one key area where the program can make a difference, which Joe also highlighted, is the importance of partnerships and alliance among stakeholders to work on needle-moving new emission solutions and technologies. Hydrogen was highlighted, CCUS, as well as harnessing carbon credit, which Ben just highlighted, sustainable finance to support the green transition. So those are some of the key takeaways from this seminar. So again, on behalf of the Embassy of Chile, Ambassador of Costa Rica, and MTI, I'd like to thank everyone for honoring us with your presence. Thank you very much.